This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and we're here for Week 2 NFL picks. And I'm joined, as always, by my boy, Mr. Matt Russell, sports betting professional and creator of The Window, available on Substack and via podcast. Mr. Matt Russell, after a lovely Week 1, how are you doing, my friend?
Well, it's funny, right? Like you say, it's a lovely Week 1. You know, I talked about my podcast earlier this week. You went 10-5. I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but my guy went 10-5. He's fired up. He's loving it. We were profitable this week in both college and the NFL, and so I should feel really great. But there's always something. There's always something in the NFL, right? And of course, that is the early exit of our survivor pick, the Cincinnati Bengals. I went off on our guy Mike Gesicki in a tongue-in-cheek rant on the podcast earlier this week, as if he was the one who, to blame. But you never know, right? One thing goes, one way, one thing goes another way as in the course of an NFL game. Maybe we might still be alive in Survivor. And so, yeah, you can be like, yeah, we had a great time and all this sort of thing, but I was still stewing. There's never a situation where you're not stewing in the middle of an NFL Sunday. Like, I mean, the rare occasions where things are going really, really well and you feel like you're basically sweeping the board. But like, how much is that going to happen? Once every 18 weeks at most? Man, yeah, there's always something. But you know what? Turn the page, Week 2. Don't even have to worry about Survivor anymore. It's like it never happened, because honestly, it kind of felt like it didn't happen. So let's do it.
I can't lie to you. I was at a baby shower on Sunday and just checking my phone periodically and just being like, hold on, wait, what? How are they? Oh, yeah, there's a lot of things there that I can say. But hey, I'll leave that for off the microphone. But peeking at my phone, I'm just like, okay, what is happening right now? And I just brought up the game and I'm watching it on my phone. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Like, Survivor Pool is about to be out right now. But hey, money made on a lot of other things here on the weekend. As you mentioned, a 10-5-1 week to start the pod. And, listen, we take the good weeks with the bad. We enjoy the waves when they're here. We ride the wave. Everything is good. Definitely take that as a Week 1 start. For the people who might be brand new to what we do here, and listen, whether you've been with us on our last 2 years when we've been doing this Clutch Picks pod for Clutch Points, got it good, yep. Or you were with us in the other iterations of this show, to enjoy the wave. But for the people who might be brand new, this is what we do. Go through each and every game. I try to give out a pick to each and every game, and then Matt comes in with the information and education on where the line was, where it is, and where it could be going heading into kickoff. And the hope is I try to come out on the other end with the more informed pick. I play the role of the viewer. Sometimes Matt convinces me to change my pick, and other times I foolishly don't listen, but that's the joke. That's just what we do here. And I got to say, as we head into Week 2, I looked at the board. I'm looking at all the lines. I'm putting all the lines in. And I was kind of rattled because I don't like the fact that I feel like I have a whole lot of favorites in Week 2. And normally we won't have this like big dialogue off the front end of the pod. But as I was going through, I'm just like, okay, well, what games am I going to change here? And then I'm like, well, no, it's really about teams that I liked before the season. So it's not like I'm overreacting to Week 1. Because it's like, no, this is how I felt before. And then teams that I don't like, and they're all playing against each other. And that's why the spreads are what they are. And that's why I'm looking at this board. I'm just like, okay, I need help in this one here. I can't even lie. So here we are. Luckily, we do this thing called the podcast where we can talk out the picks.
Yeah, man, listen, there's a lot obviously to unpack with Week 2, right? Because Week 1, we go, all right, how do we feel about teams based on just kind of research and some hunches and obviously injury issues and statistical stuff and all that stuff, and you just kind of bet your opinion. Like you said, with Week 2, it's obviously a little bit different. Week 1, we look at teams and we're like, okay, there's two teams that we really like and they're playing each other, and an example of that is like Seattle and Denver. And then I watched the game and I'm like, I'm not sure either of these teams are good. So like, I might be double wrong about this, but at least I didn't bet on it because, I liked both teams going in. Now that's just one game, so you can't overreact, which leads to Week 2, where you go, okay, am I taking, what am I taking here? Week 1 opinion or preseason opinion? And what the market does, right, is it reacts to week 1 opinion almost exclusively. So, as you were talking there, I'm literally just finishing up looking at the look-ahead lines for next week and the lines for this week, combining those to see how the market has changed for all these teams. So the theme of today, right, is 2 things. One, did the team's rating, Team A's rating change? And do we agree with A, that it should change, and B, how much it should change? And then the second thing is, if it didn't change, should it have? Right? Yeah. So we're going to talk today and going game by game here about both teams and sort of, did their rating change? How did it change? And why? And should it have changed? And should it change if it didn't change, for all of the changes that went on after week 1?
I got you. I follow. I'm with you. I'm with you here. I think the big thing for me here, and as we get into the picks, if you stayed through my little rambling session here to start the pod, just another reminder too, wherever you happen to be listening to this pod, all we ask for is bless with a like, bless with a follow, tell your friends, let the peoples know, show us that you like what you hear. And especially if you're listening and you've been winning some money with us, right? It's a simple ask. Hit the like.
Not complicated.
Not that complicated at all, right? And you know what else isn't complicated? Or it could be complicated for certain players on said team to make it to the game on time and safely. But we head to Thursday night football. And the Buffalo Bills are in Miami to take on the Dolphins. Dolphins favored by 2.5 points. And yeah, kind of alluded to, getting to the game safely. And one of the things that I was almost late for I was late for said baby shower, but it was because I was like, what's happening with Tyreek Hill? And I, like everyone else, was watching Adam Schefter and Drew Rosenhaus on TV. And it's just like, what is going on right now? This is insane. But yes, Tyreek Hill did make it. I did also add in a bet of Tyreek Hill to score an anytime touchdown. And I made the joke in the group text that he's going to make a mockery celebration of being arrested. And guess what? Ding, ding, ding. If only there was a way to bet on TD celebrations, right? If only there was a way.
Hit that parlay.
It would have been my biggest parlay of the day. But either way, they get off to a slow start, right? They get off to a slow start.
Yeah.
They come back, win the game. The Bills also got off to a slow start, came back, won the game.
Mm-hmm.
Buffalo, I'm not really sure what led to their slow start. We can get there, of course. Josh Allen putting on the cape, doing what he does. At least Miami, I'm kind of like, okay, I kind of understand why you might have gotten off to a slow start in this game. There's a lot of stuff going on. Anyways, I say all that to say Miami minus 2.5. This is one of those things where it's under 3. I think Miami's offense, they just showed the explosive nature of how they're able to just turn a game around on a big play like that. And I don't know if the Bills have that in their offense, or maybe they don't need it. I don't know. That's my question to you. I don't really know what to make of that Bills performance other than, can Josh Allen really do that for a whole season? I don't know. Like, can he make it through a whole season playing like that? Because he put in work. But that's week 1, bro.
Yeah, right. Like, you're not battling for the Super Bowl against the Cardinals in the first week of September. So, okay, point spread wise, yeah, no, of course. And listen, if life was a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, I feel like there's a world in which you're looking at your phone driving down the road, watching the Tyreek Hill video, and it's causing you to have reckless driving, and then you get pulled over, and then you have somebody taking a video of you, and it turns into this cycle.
Would you be my Drew Rosenhaus?
Well, yeah, you'd be like, call Russell. Anyway, major diversion there to start the show.
Insane.
So, okay, let's put it this way, right? Think of it, Miami, probably about a 2-point home field advantage, right? I know a lot of people sort of say 3 points, but it's not 1995 anymore. Average home field advantage is about 1.75. Miami, the Heat, all of that sort of thing, they usually get about 2, right? So this line actually opened Miami 1.5 and has drifted higher. I think a lot of people think Miami is better than Buffalo, and from a AFC East futures perspective, as we talked about on the show, I ruled out the Jets, and I was like looking at the schedule, and I think Buffalo's schedule is a lot more difficult than Miami's schedule, so I give them the nod in a futures market that was pretty much equal across the board. Like you get plus 200 on basically either of those three teams, and I, for schedule reasons, grab Miami. I think they got away with one last week. Now, Javon Holland made a great play on Travis Etienne to avoid a 17-point deficit in the second half. And so Miami wasn't exactly great, like you said, slow start. But I think the market is still sort of looking at this going like, yeah, like we like Miami better. We like Miami better. And so when this opened -1.5, then drifted to 2, and you go, okay, 2's fine, equal teams, 2 points of home field advantage. That makes sense. Then it drifts to 2.5. So for me as a bettor, I'm going to wait and see if we can get some glimmers of +3 with Buffalo, because I do think these teams are pretty similar. And honestly, like I would look at maybe the total in this game. Now, as soon as I say totals, everybody should like turn the TV off right now, or turn the radio, turn the podcast, turn their phone off. Like, don't trust me when it comes to totals, right? There's a reason I don't traffic. Speaking of traffic, in that game. But for me, I think it's a really fair line. It's weird for me to say, like, I like Buffalo a little bit because of how I talked about being on Miami from a big picture standpoint. But the schedule, the point of analyzing the schedule and looking at Buffalo and being like, man, there's a lot of coin flip games after that Arizona game, which, by the way, like turned into a coin flip game on the field. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have really anything to do with the fact that, like, I do kind of think Buffalo is the better team when these two are actually on the field, right? I think Buffalo can win this game, go to 2-0, Miami be 1-1, and then Miami can catch up and pass them because of the schedule that both these teams have to play. So I think the defenses are both suspect for, each side. Buffalo kind of cleaned it up a little bit, right, against Kyler Murray. But then again, like expecting 60 good minutes out of Kyler Murray and the Cardinals was asking probably a little too much, even though we thought they had a chance to win. And listen, you felt pretty good as they're up double digits early in that game that you might have an upset there with the Cardinals. So I'm leaning here to Buffalo. I'm waiting for the +3. But I understand this line. The line makes total sense to me. This isn't one where it's like massive like change of rating. Like Miami gets a little bit of credit to get bumped up here. Basically if you win, you're going to get sort of, we talk about a rating system, right? Out of 100. So if Miami was a 57 out of 100 going in, they get a point's worth of credit to go to 58 out of 100, right? Like it's not a huge adjustment. Same thing with Buffalo. Both these teams came very close to covering, but they also came very close to losing. That's the thin line in the NFL. So I think a pretty fair line. We'll wait for +3, and I'll be on Buffalo if I can get that.
Yeah, simple thing here for me. I'm basically along there with you, where at 2.5, I'm gonna ride with Miami here as I'm forced myself to make a pick in every single game here. I'll be at 2.5 at Miami. Once it gets to 3, there'll be what's the Nate Dogg drop, the hold up, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
There's a record scratch hold up combo there. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. As we head into Sunday's action here, we got what should be a big boy matchup, but one team didn't really look like big boys last week, and that would be the Cincinnati Bengals, who find themselves in Kansas City. Kansas City favored by 6 points in this one. I'll lay the 6 points here with the Chiefs, and the one thing is, I thought this line would be over a touchdown, and I was gonna be on Cincinnati in that instance. But the fact that it's at under a touchdown, picture me rolling with the Chiefs, right? Surprise, surprise, surprise. But here's the thing, right? KC still at home. They had the extra long rest, as obviously they didn't play since last Thursday. There are a lot of close-ups, though, that have been on along the interwebs of Joe Burrow messing with his hand, and he's stretching his hand, and he's struggling to pick up water bottles, and like a lot of things that aren't looking good, right? Like you heard all the talk in the preseason, and then you see this game, and that doesn't really look good. I don't know. The Chiefs, for their angle, which I want you to talk about here, because it's one thing you talk about every year, and it happened last week, where the Chiefs, when they had their big time plays going, right? And then, they have their plays and they're not being touched and their offense looks incredible. And then it's just like, they just shift gear back down. Like, all right, yeah, all our great plays work. Cool. Good to know. Settle down. Oh yeah, now we'll just pound the ball into the line and let the other team come back. And it's the most frustrating thing watching them let another team come back and trick you into thinking, oh, maybe they're going to blow this cover because they're just not running their real plays anymore. Yeah. Is 6 too much here?
So, okay. From a line perspective, you asked the question, is 6 too much, right? So Kansas City gets a small bump, that like 1 rating point bump, which by the way, like a rating point bump equals about 1/3 of a point when it comes to the point spread, right? So when I say like they get bumped from 69 up to 70, it really means like I said, 1/3 of a point, something along those lines, right? So Cincinnati is the more interesting case here, right? Because Kansas City's Kansas City, and like 70 out of 100 is literally like best rating in the league right now and all that. Cincinnati's an interesting case because you mentioned Joe Burrow, right? And that game, first of all, absolutely not ready to play. Basically start, top to bottom. And when you're watching 8 games at once or trying to watch 8 games at once, when one team out of the 16 teams that is playing, or 2 or 3 or whatever, when they don't look like they're giving an NFL level of effort and execution, it stands out versus if you're watching on Monday Night Football because maybe the other team isn't playing very well, right? And you only have that one thing to compare it to. On Sunday at 1:00, it's like, guys, I'm comparing you to all of the teams, not just the one that you're playing, which if you watch them play the team that they're playing, a team that, has one of the worst ratings in the league. We talked about this last week, right? Where if you're taking a team that is the co-favorite to win the AFC North, that division with a 10.5 win total, going up against a team with a 4.5 point win total, and that game is being played at the home of the better team, how is this number not double digits? Well, you can say, oh, T. Higgins was out, but I'm sorry, T. Higgins just doesn't really move the point spread, right? Like maybe 1/2 of a point. We saw Christian McCaffrey get ruled out, and that point spread moved 0.75 essentially in the market. So if you think T. Higgins is the big difference maker here, that's one thing. The Jamar Chase, okay, like I'm not sure if I'm going to play or how much I'm going to play and all of that sort of thing. But all of that sort of speaks to, for lack of a better term, vibes when it comes to the Bengals. And when we're talking about week 1, I hate to say this because it sounds really sort of square or stupid, but like vibes matter in week 1. Like if you're not going at it in training camp, you don't have everybody dialed in. We saw your guy Brandon Ayuk dropping passes on Monday night. Like if you're not, this is the NFL. Like it is really, really hard. It is hard to catch passes in the NFL. Like imagine the cauldron of imagine being an official just standing in the middle of the field, watching these guys just flying by you, having collisions. And the idea that you just kind of just show up in week 1, the Bengals are 2-7 and people say under Joe Burrow as if he's the guy controlling whether the defense can tackle Ramondre Stevenson, who looked like, I would say like a young Anthony Dorsett out there, but like, it's not like he busted long plays. The Patriots did not have a 20+ yard play on offense.
Yeah.
And they still win the game because that's how bad the Bengals were. So is the tackling, the fumbling, the drop passes, the fact that your guy Joe Burrow in his hand wasn't throwing the ball deep down the field, is all that stuff going to get cleaned up in the matter of 1 week when you're going to visit the two-time defending Super Bowl champions? It could be one thing if it was like a little easier matchup or a similar matchup. Like all they had to do, honestly, against the Patriots was like stop Jacoby Brissett from scrambling and stop the run with Ramondre Stevenson. And like the question gets a lot harder this week, and you're supposed to get better. I don't see that. So this line was available -5.5. I grabbed that, bet that 6. You're absolutely welcome to do that as well. Like that makes still a ton of sense. This line, how do you get to -6 from this line? Because this is a matchup that has been -3, -3.5, right? The last few years because of the regard that Cincinnati is getting. So, I talked this week in an article on Substack about the concept of range, right? And you and I have obviously talked about this for years, but like you get a rating. So we talk about Kansas City's rating. Their rating is a 70. On any given week, with full health, they could play badly, and for them, badly means 60 out of 100, right? They're essentially a 10-9 win team on that given day. They could play really well, and you're just sitting there going like, oh, this team's awesome. They're going to win the Super Bowl. Like, everybody give up. And I would say, like, yeah, that would be them at like an 80 out of 100, which sort of equates to about a 14-win team. Where they'll end up finishing is in that 11, 12, 13 win, area, because, over time, sample size, yada, yada, yada. Cincinnati, again, was supposed to have a similar range, right? Fully healthy, it's supposed to be somewhere, maybe not 60 to 80, but let's say 55 to 75. And normally they'd be rated around the, like I said, like the 60, 65, like 67, something like that. And you get a 2.5, 3-point spread because these teams would be considered not equal, but like kind of close to it. The rating to get to -6 for the Bengals is 55. So it's absolutely at the bottom of that conceptual range that we have for Cincinnati. Problem is, it's week 2. And the Cincinnati Bengals might actually just stink. Or they might just be kind of average. And Joe Burrow might not have the arm strength or the hand strength or whatever you want to say to be able to get this thing done. The run game, the offensive line, might not be capable of letting them do what they want to do on offense. And so maybe their range is actually 45 to 65, because that was a team last week that played like a 45, maybe even lower than that. So if the range is 40 to 60, 55 is overrating the Bengals. If the range is 45 to 65, 55 is a fair rating for the Bengals, and they have to still play to that level. And if their rating is 55 to 75, then there's technically value on the Bengals. But anything from the Bengals that we saw last week makes you think that they should be, considered a 60, having a performance of a 60 or 65 team at any given moment. I just don't see that. And obviously there's a history of having these slow starts and not being ready to necessarily go. And that 2-7 record in these early weeks, those weren't necessarily against Super Bowl, 2-time defending Super Bowl champions, right? I expect them to go to 2-8 against the spread in the first 2 weeks of the season after dealing with the Chiefs, who have, by the way, a rest advantage as well. And again, looked fine to me last Thursday night.
Yeah, Chiefs look to be firing on all cylinders, and it's crazy to think that they could even be better than they've been over the last few years. It's crazy. Sure. But yeah, Chiefs -6 is the pick here. Of course, we'll head through a lot more of the games in a moment. But first, think that QB will throw for more than 300 yards? How about that receiver in Miami grabbing a touchdown? Check out DraftKings Pick 6, the newest way to compete against others and play fantasy football to win cash with DraftKings. Pick a player and choose if they'll have more or less of a specific stat, like yards, touchdowns, catches, and more. Get your picks right, and you'll win cash. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code CLUTCH. That's code CLUTCH for new customers, and play $5 and get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Plus, 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer expires September 19th. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. 1 per new customer. Reward issued as $50 in non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 6 months. NFL Plus Premium offer available only to new and former NFL Plus subscribers. Additional NFL Plus Premium terms at NFL.com/terms. All right, and as we get back into things here on the pod, on the picks, all the fun stuff here, we go back to the Rams, who had an interesting game last week. And I mean, back-to-back interesting games they should have to start this season as they find themselves in Arizona. taking on the Cardinals. Cardinals is 1.5 favorites. Cards offense looked all right. Their defense, had no answers for Josh Allen, which, there's a long line of NFL teams that have a problem trying to stop Josh Allen, right? Rams went toe-to-toe with the Lions. I don't know who we feel like the Lions are one of the top teams in the NFC. Rams just went toe-to-toe to them, went with some injuries, but, right there, you lose an OT. I liked what I saw from the Rams. I'm going to take the 1.5 with the Rams. Give me the Rams plus 1.5 in this one. But this is not really overreacting to last week, but more so what we've talked about in our previous games, just sticking with what I thought at the start of the season. I just think the Rams are better than Arizona, and I'm willing to do that at 1.5 on the road.
Yeah, so we talked about the idea of rating. Did you get a rating change, and should you have, or if you did, was it too much? Cardinals here have moved from small underdog to small favorite here. And I guess I sort of understand why, and I'll put it to you this way. Arizona actually got a little bit of credit. Not that their rating necessarily changed in the loss to Buffalo. It just kind of stayed the same, where a lot of times if you lose, in the same way if you win, you're going to get a couple of ticks down. Like I said, 1/3 of a point, 1/2 of a point, something along those lines, right? I think the big deal here with the Rams is, as good as they looked last week at times, now keep in mind that game's a 17-3 game at one point. And, you're obviously sort of wondering if, we're just going to cruise to, because I was on the Lions, and a lot of people were, because that line moved up to 5.5, which is another thing on the Rams side that's sort of a strike, right? Where the market didn't like the Rams going into that game. Now we're watching that game, and it was incredible to watch Matthew Stafford work with the fact that he had basically a swinging, old-timey saloon door at left tackle, just letting Aiden Hutchinson just do whatever he wanted, right?
That was crazy.
And then it like in almost no time at all, it was like, oh, this is bad. Hang on a sec. McVay and Stafford are just like, beep, boop, 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 boop. Let me just dial up all of the plays, or if we don't have a left side of our offensive line, what plays do we run? Oh, like this page of the playbook. And like all of that stuff worked against a Detroit defense that up until that point looked pretty good. And I think the revamping of the Lions defense is going to work down the line. I don't think the Cardinals defense is going to be able to take advantage of those sort of negative things that the Rams have, one of which being Puka Nacua being ruled out for the next 4 weeks, going on short-term IR, which I think is the reason why the Rams rating has come down, because you can say okay, the line has moved, but why does the line move? Because the rating changes. So essentially right now, what do we talk about the home field advantage thing, right? The Cardinals don't have a home field advantage, basically, or at least they have a below average home field advantage. So when we say the average home field advantage is 1.75, I give the Cardinals 1.5, and that's actually being pretty generous. And here we are, Cardinals favored by 1.5, right? So this is telling you that the version of both these teams right now are the same. The Cardinals right now are the same as the Rams. And to get there, you have to upgrade, or at least sort of keep the Cardinals where they were, even though they were outscored by a pretty significant margin after taking that big lead against the Bills, in a situation where you take a big lead in the NFL, it's supposed to be to your advantage, right? Defensively, it's supposed to be to your advantage. Offensively, it's supposed to be to your advantage. So it should be difficult for a team to come back. It wasn't that difficult for the Bills. And so I think it's not going to be all that difficult for Matthew Stafford this week. Now, again, the short week turnaround, little bit, listen, it's Sunday versus Sunday, Sunday afternoon versus Sunday night. Is that much, a big deal? Obviously, the injuries are the issue, but we've seen Sean McVay over and over and over again, as long as he has functional quarterback play, and Matthew Stafford is far better than functional, and he seems to have a fully healthy Cooper Kupp, which I think is I would have liked to get in on some Cooper Kupp statistical futures, knowing that he was just going to be fully healthy and catching passes for Matthew Stafford. Now we'll see if that lasts 17 weeks, both for Kupp and for Stafford, but they both seem pretty healthy this week. And so, yeah, the Nacua thing sucks, but that's why this line has moved. If Nacua had been ruled out and it hadn't moved at all, we could then be Puka Nacua is out, right? But the people who are going to tell you, Puka Nacua is out, That's already built into the line, right? The market is fully aware that Puka Nacua is out. And so therefore the Rams and Cardinals are being considered the same here. And I just don't have that. And I don't think the Cardinals have enough of a home field advantage that there's value to betting the Cardinals here. So I'm with you, man. I think the Rams get this road win here. I like them plus the 1.5 or even on the money line.
Yeah, right there with you on the Rams. Same thing, might be looking at a little money line sprinkle there. Well, we mentioned the Rams matchup on Sunday night and their opponent from Sunday night. The winners, the overtime winners in the Detroit Lions, are now back at home as 7-point favorites against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, I mean, Baker was balling on Sunday. There's no other way to say it, right?
Yeah.
But this is a definite step up in weight class to me anyways. And, listen, Bucs going from home to road, we know there's a difference there in terms of how they roll in that sense. And yeah, at 7, I'll take the Lions. I'll lay the points at 7. Once it goes higher than 7, I'll hesitate, but I'll still lay the points. I can't lie to you here. But yeah, I'm on the Detroit Lions here. The one thing that I forgot, and this is going to sound kind of stupid, so I'll admit it on the front end. The one thing I kind of forgot while watching the Lions play, it's like, oh yeah, they're always going to keep going for it. I like that. I like that when you're betting on that team, right?
Totally.
Like, you like the aggressiveness, but it took me a second, like watching the game, to be like, oh yes, they're going to keep going for it. I like that. Lions -7.
But I agree with you. Problem is he kind of stopped doing that. He stopped doing it in the second half, right? There was 2 fourth downs that were like, man, I thought this is a thing that you do here. And the concern, obviously, is that your 49ers ruined them last year. And that he turns into like a Brandon Staley situation.
He won't go that far. I have faith.
I don't know. I wouldn't have said the same thing about Staley, who was like running and gunning and going for fourth downs, and then people got mad at him, and he was like, "I'm not doing it anymore." Fine, and and took away his analytical advantage, right? That point per game that you're stealing by being smarter than the other team from how you manage the game. Mm-hmm. So speaking of half points and whatever, like rating perspective, I didn't touch the Lions. I didn't touch the Bucs after last week from an estimation, and it comes out to Detroit -7. So, but this is the situation of, all right, like their rating didn't change, but should it have? Now you look at the Lions result, right, where it's like needed overtime to cover that number. Obviously, there was big time interest in the Lions from the betting market, going from -3.5. I think when we talked last Wednesday, on the podcast, to by the time it closed, it was like -5, -5.5, and we all got away with it. We all got away with it in overtime. Were we on the right side? In the first half, it certainly felt like that. Second half, not so much. Overtime, we're back on the right side again, right? So the point is like, would you move the Lions up or down? And the answer is like neither, right? And the Bucs had a really good showing in blowing out the Commanders. Now you could say, and I will, that the Commanders defense is god-awful. Like couldn't cover anybody, couldn't tackle anybody. And so at that point, you're just sort of like, well, it was, are you going to give them any credit for beating the Commanders? It's still an NFL team. And like, maybe it's a Chris Rock, like, you don't get credit for doing what you're supposed to do. But like, I don't think they were supposed to pound them like the way that they did. Right. And so if you're going, all right, should we downgrade the Commanders? Well, or excuse me, the Bucs? Well, definitely not. And do we need to upgrade them? And I think the answer to that is if they were rated like as an above average team, as like a true playoff team, as a 54, 55, 56 type team, then no, we'd be like, yeah, okay, an average or above average team is supposed to beat up on the Commanders and take advantage of their poor defense and a rookie quarterback on the road. The problem is that change of rating, or the rating that isn't being changed, is at 46 out of 100, right? So they're being considered a below average team. And so even if you get to say, okay, well, that was a good enough performance to at least tell you that they're 50, 51, right? Fringe playoff team, 500 team, which honestly is how they have been for the last 2 years, right? Being a 500 team, 17 and 17 in those first 2 seasons. Now you move them up, 5 rating points, 6 rating points. And what do we talk about, right? That's a third of a point per point, if you will, which means 1.5, 2 points against the point spread. And now you start going, well, maybe this line should be 6, 5.5, something along those lines. And that's where value is created, because people look and they go, well, Detroit, we had them, by the way, like rated as a very good team, as a contending team. So like they're already rated highly, which is why this number is where it is. The Bucs, there's plenty of room for them to grow, if you will. And I thought the defense was impressive, and you always know what you're going to get from the Bucs. I shouldn't say always, but most of the time you know what you're going to get from the Bucs defense, right? You're going to get stopping the run, Vita Vea in there in the middle, and everybody, locked in on Todd Bowles being like, stop the run, stop the run, stop the run. And to me, that's kind of the way that you obviously need to play against the Lions here, right? Like if the Bucs can stop the Lions run game, I think if we're really being honest with ourselves, like we saw some scary old Jared Goff stuff in that game on Sunday night. All right. Obviously that interception, he goes and he scrambles for that one play. But other than that, it's a lot of, immobile Jared Goff. I think the Buccaneers defense, Todd Bowles, they talked about in the broadcast how listen, who knows how legitimate this is, but Todd Bowles had said like, oh, it's the fastest defense that I've ever had. Like, I'm loving it, blah, blah, blah. And like, maybe that's a shot at some of the guys who've departed, Carlton Davis, obviously moving over to the Lions, which is like somewhat interesting in this game. The offense didn't really take a massive step back or a step back at all, despite the fact that Dave Canales is no longer there. And honestly, if you look at the Panthers last week, the Dave Canales stock may have taken some hit there, and Liam Cohen seemed to fit nicely because they were getting dudes wide open. Jalen McMillan absolutely wide open in the secondary for the Buccaneers in that game. I think the Buccaneers can hang with this team. Obviously, they went there in the playoffs last year. They lost, but they had backdoor potential on a point spread where we liked the Lions in that game and covered with the Lions. So again, it's kind of weird that the Lions have these back-to-back playoff rematches from last year, where in one case last year they didn't cover against the Rams, and then the other case they did cover against the Buccaneers. And I kind of thought in both cases it might be reversed, right? They covered last week against the Rams, and this week I don't think they cover. Like I said, I grabbed the +7.5. I'm going to hit it again at +7.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. You almost had me on this one. I can't lie to you. You almost had me on this one, but
okay. Your aversion to Baker. It's your aversion to Baker.
You said it. You know me too well.
I know.
We've been doing this for too long.
Yeah.
You know me too well. I need to see Baker ball a little more. Baker goes in on the road here and does it. Listen, all right, I might become a believer. I doubt it, but there's a better chance there for sure. I do enjoy that me. You took the words right out of my mouth. So I'll just move on and say, I'm still on Detroit -7 at 7.5. If it goes above, I'll think about it. But yeah, as of now, we're on the Detroit Lions -7. We move on here to the Las Vegas Raiders, who I'm definitely not on. No, I'm joking. But the Raiders are in Baltimore taking on the Ravens. We know the Ravens lost to the Chiefs to open up the season in a crazy, crazy game, a wild comeback that almost saw them come back and, send it to overtime, or potentially were robbed of just seeing them forget about overtime. It looked like they were going for 2 and for the win.
Yeah.
And think about how crazy that moment would have been.
Yeah, we were dead.
Epic game. The Raiders, meanwhile, the opposite of an epic game for them. Yeah. And you just talked about coaches going for it on 4th down, and Antonio Pierce with a wild one there, which I'm sure you'll get to. But I know this might seem like a lot of points, and 9.5 is a lot of points. So my rule is, once we're getting up into double digits, I got to really believe in the one team and really despise the other team. And those things both tick here. But the other part is this is just a perfect get back game for the Ravens. No, like, after losing, you got to get back, feeling good vibes, Lamar running around, all that, I'm on the Ravens. I'll lay the 9.5 points here.
Yeah. I mean, obviously my aversion to laying points in the NFL is, comes with me anytime a number is what this number is. I grabbed some Raiders +10, literally just a single bet, like basically my minimum bet on a spread in the NFL.
Sprinkle.
Yeah, just because I can see this line coming down because it's the result of an adjustment, tiny adjustment up on the Ravens, right? They're a toe away from covering that game, and at which point they would get that sort of credit for a cover, which we just talked about as far as, a small rating boost. The Raiders got pretty significantly downgraded, right? Like, this is a team that was, I think they closed pretty close to -2.5 in that game against the Chargers on Sunday. And so that sort of extrapolates out to like a 44, 45, like mid 40s, like certainly not an average team, but not that bad. And this line suggests that they're down to about a 40, right? So that's like a 2-point adjustment. And that's reflected in the look ahead line, which, last week, sportsbooks post a line that for the following week, right? So you can look right now at week 3 lines at certain sports books if you want. So that's the look ahead line. The look ahead line was Baltimore -7.5. Okay. So, I can talk to you about ratings out of 100, or I can talk to you about like the look ahead line being -7.5. But either way, right? Like Baltimore is getting more credit, or Vegas is getting less credit, or a combination of the two. And I just look at at Vegas and I go, was last week's game, did that make me think Vegas is worse than I already thought that they were? and I don't think so. Like, maybe a tiny bit, right? But there's also an element of like, yes, let's say we think that 9.5 is a fair point spread. There's also the artificial gravitational pull of a close game, right? In the way that like you can be up 17 points going into the fourth quarter, and if Gardner Minshew's on the other side, like he's going to keep trying, and you're just going to kind of like let things fall, where they may, and they're down 16, they get a touchdown, they go for 2, they're down 8 with 45 seconds left. I'm certainly not relying on that, but that's the point of the gravitational pull that I'm talking about. Like, the Ravens don't really care about blowing this team out. And then the secondary element from an on-field handicapping perspective is I still don't love the fit for Derrick Henry. I will say I think I was right when we talked about that last week, watching that game against Kansas City that night and going like, yeah, Derrick Henry does not fit. And so if you're boosting the Ravens or thinking the Ravens are going to be great this season because of Derrick Henry, I just don't think that's fair. And the offensive line, I think, had more than their fair share of issues. And if there's one thing that the Raiders can potentially do, it's take advantage of a poor offensive line or a suspect offensive line with the Max Crosbys of the world, right? Chargers, I think, have a pretty good offensive line, right? They have Rashawn Slater at left tackle. That's not something that the Ravens have because Ronnie Stanley is their, best big name tackle or offensive lineman, in general. And like, I don't know how much time he's got necessarily left, right? And so I just look at it and go like, there's a couple of decent matchups here for the Raiders. I think, I don't like Antonio Pierce, obviously from a decision-making standpoint, but I think he still gets the guys motivated to play for 60 minutes. So I think you do get 60 minutes out of the Raiders and 60 minutes out of Gardner Minshew. And if that's the case, like, I just tread really lightly with these big point spreads. So a small bet at +10 early in the week, honestly, is probably just where I'm going to end with it, because like this is a 1:00 game on a day where there's 10 of them at 1:00. It's like, games can fall off the old like flipping and screen schedule pretty easily. And if that's just what happens here, that's what happens. And if it doesn't, that means I've got a decent bet at +10 with the Raiders. So.
Yeah, it's not like you hit me with a lot of conviction here to change the pick, but I know what you're saying. No. I know exactly what you're saying. I was listening to you. I was looking up because I was pretty sure I saw the quote of Harbaugh basically saying what you're saying, in the sense that he didn't bring in Derrick Henry to be the guy to get 30 rushes a game, like 30 touches in a game, right? Essentially saying what you're saying, despite the fact that the whole world was thinking, oh, Derrick Henry on the Ravens, like this is going to be incredible. Yeah, this is a tough one, but this is another one, right? Where again, if it gets to 10, like you're going to hear me repeating the same thing. If it got to 10.5, okay, I might have been on the Raiders, but yeah, at 9.5, I'll stick with the Ravens here, and I'll be back on this pod next week being like, why did I take all these favorites last week? That's exactly how this is going to go.
Yeah.
And we move on to another game and our next game. And guess what? In this one, we got the Cleveland Browns in Jacksonville. Jacksonville favored by 3 points. And guess what? Here's another game where I want to take the Cleveland Browns and take the plus points. And I wish that it was 3.5. And you might have had me being like, you know what? I'm not going to overreact to how terrible they looked last week. But instead, it's 3 points.
Yeah.
And at 3 points, I'm like, I might need to see it from Deshaun Watson. Like he might need to prove to me at this point that he's just not epically washed, because that was not a performance, one for the ages last week at all. He looked horrible. And I know the Jags blew the game last week. I get that. But I still think that, you know, the pieces are there for them to be a solid team once they stick to basics and, you know, don't fumble it on the one. But, you know,
wrap it up.
Stay to those fundamentals, you know, put my guy like, what was the movie? The Program, where they have him walk around with the football.
Sure.
Right. Don't lose a football. Don't lose a football. I think that's a Program. Anyways, point remains Jags -3. I'm fine here laying more points because, you know, that's my theme this week, apparently.
Yeah. So this is a Deshaun Watson like referendum game, I think. Right. And I know it's like, it's week 2. How could we be there this quickly? But like, it's not. This is like season 3 of him being with the Browns. So, I mean, it's worth mentioning that obviously Monday, another civil accusation comes out on Deshaun Watson. I imagine he knew about that before the news broke. I imagine his lawyers were informed, especially with civil cases. These things are, usually brought up before they get publicized. I imagine there's a ton of things we never hear about different players and people, et cetera, et cetera. And so at that point, especially with how weird the end of the training camp, preseason, like, oh, I've got an arm issue. It's like, do you? Or like, what's going on here? Feels like you need reps. Jameis Winston's involved in our lives. Like, all of that is all sort of was like, what's the other shoe to drop, right? And then maybe that's the shoe. And so he goes into that game against Dallas underprepared, bad sort of mental state, all of that sort of thing. You could also make the case that mental state is what is made him washed. As you referred to, right? Like, you can be physically washed, you can be mentally washed, you can be motivationally washed. There's a bunch of different ways to be washed. Mm-hmm. And I say all that to say, because like the value here is on the Browns at +3, right? And when people say value, they're just saying it to say value. But the reason we have ratings up, and the reason we look at market ratings is so that we can compare what the perception is now to what the perception of a team was as recently as like 6 days ago, right? And so I'm sitting here with the numbers and I'm messing around with them, and I'm just like, how do we get this line to make sense for Jags -3? Well, okay, we do the look ahead line thing because I think that's, again, it's the easiest way to sort of have people kind of understand, what the deal is. That was -2. My numbers come out to -2. That's because I'm high on the Jags in general. I've had to bring the Browns down to basically a league average team. If you just took how they played on Sunday, they're a below average team. And so like that is how you get to the Jags -3, because you can't upgrade the Jags. Even if I think watching that game against the Dolphins, I'm impressed with the Jags defense, holding up as long as they did. Obviously, the one big play to Tyreek right after the fumble. I will go to my grave saying that if ETN gets that touchdown, they have a 17-point lead. They just win the game, right? Yeah. And so, so I can kind of see in a losing cause why you might upgrade the Jags, right? Intellectually. So a combination of Jags looking better, even though they didn't necessarily win, and the Browns looking terrible and Deshaun Watson looking terrible is how you get to 3. Does that necessarily extrapolate to this week? Well, first of all, we're going to need to know the health and wellness of both offensive tackles for the Browns, because you go, can the Jags do defensively what the Cowboys did defensively? And the answer with like guys like Josh Hines-Allen and your boy Eric Armstead and Trayvon Walker, who had some like outrageous like run stuff rate on the sort of weak side there. Yeah, I think they can, because I thought they were pretty good against the Dolphins. So I'm with you, because it's like conceptually, I like both teams coming into the season because obviously the Browns were like plus 550, plus 600 to win the AFC North. And relative to that price, I was into that. And certainly if you go into that game and you've just watched Cincinnati play and you know that the Ravens already have a loss, you're sitting there going like, man, if the Browns, who were favorites, by the way, last week against the Cowboys, if they just win that game, they have that head start in the division. And so I can't say that I like one team and I don't like the other team, but like I certainly liked my data point from week 1 with the Jags more than I like the data point for the Browns. So, you say this is down to 3. It was 3.5, on open or certainly earlier on in the week. Okay. I want to just double check that. Yeah, like there was some 3.5. I mean, it was juiced to the plus 3.5, right? You have to pay a little extra for it. But I wonder, because of the way that the math works and like I said, the ratings being less than 3, if this number will ever come off 3, or there will be cheap minus 2.5s. You can get the Jags minus 2.5 at like a minus 120. So I have not bet this game yet because, again, like when I show value on one side and it's a side I don't want, I'm going to kind of wait as long as possible, because by the end of the week, people tend to talk themselves into the numerical statistical value side, and that is technically the Browns here. Though, again, like what reason would we have to trust the Browns offense when neither the quarterback nor the running back are scary, which, the Browns are built to run the football, and maybe they will once Nick Chubb comes back. And maybe by then Deshaun Watson won't be so spooked, rattled, and unprepared for NFL play. I just think this is kind of a tough spot here to now go on the road against Jacksonville. Maybe there's a heat element, right? Because, by the way, like, it's not just hot in week 1. It's hot in week 2 as well, right? Like, the temperatures outside, right? Like, it's pretty decently hot right now. And in Florida, I imagine pretty brutal. So, like, I think it just sets up really well for the Jags here, but there's a chance we get a slightly better price than the minus 3, which I think is, a little bit juiced to the Jag side anyway.
Yeah, I'm there again, laying 3 points with the Jags. Interesting one there for sure. Moving on to the Jets, who are 3.5-point road favorites in Tennessee. And the Jets, I know they didn't show out versus the Niners, but of course, I think the positive spin is, hey, Aaron Rodgers was healthy, right? The reality, though, is that was against the Niners defense. And one thing I do know is that the Titans are not the Niners. Will Levis, he was wilding. That dude, he was out here wilding on Sunday.
Bro.
And they blew a lead themselves, which we'll get to. I know you want to talk about that for sure.
Of course.
But yeah, I'm gonna lay the points here with the Jets. I just don't think they're gonna go to 0-2. I think, the 3.5 is a lot. And the one thing that stands out to me the most, this would normally be a classic me rolling with Mike Vrabel and the Tennessee Titans as home dogs here. And I'm just not going to do that. I'm on the Jets here. And this is a weird one for me at road 3.5 points.
Yeah.
Help me.
Yeah. Let's see it. Let's see if we can do it. Here we go. Okay. Aaron Rodgers is healthy. He made it through the game, all of that sort of stuff. Offense still looked pretty rough to me, man. Looked pretty rough to me. And you can obviously give the 49ers defense, a modicum of credit for that. I thought the bigger concern for the Jets was defensively, on a better day for San Francisco, and maybe they convert a few more third downs because Christian McCaffrey's around. And listen, that's not to besmirch Jordan Mason, who played a great game, but the third down conversions is where I think that they were missing Christian McCaffrey. They could have hung 50 on the Jets that day, my friend, right? And so you've got the Jets playing on Monday night and the sort of build up, the balloon and the vibes in the first quarter on social media about the Jets, and just Joe Namath is practically coming out, coming down the parade route. And you're just man, the vibes are huge here, and people are saying this game's over and blah, blah, blah. It's just dude, what are you talking about? Take away your handicapping card if you're calling this game over at 7-3 Jets. And it's yikes. And then the balloon just gets popped, right? And it's the balloon gets popped and you go, what's next? What's next for the Jets? What's the excuse now? Oh, we weren't, we were working on some stuff. We're gonna be what was training camp for? What was all the vibes for training camp? and now it's like, okay, we're going from San Francisco, flying back to New York, and now flying out to Tennessee for a road game against the Titans, who I want to talk about almost more than I want to talk about the Jets here, because that game was brutal. And imagine that game not being like the anguish lead, right? Like the Bengals somehow out anguished us more than Will Levis, your guy Weiland, because the Bears are not going to score a touchdown on offense. Like they could have won that game 20-17 and made the comeback, because obviously the block punt and all that stuff. But like they weren't scoring a touchdown on offense. And everybody's talking about Caleb Williams and like him not being very good in that game. And that is fair. But like at what point did the Titans defense get some credit for that? Because the Titans defense didn't throw the interception for Will Levis, and the Titans defense didn't give up the block punt, right? And so I was really impressed with the Titans defense, and I, going into it, thought that there might be reason that the Titans defense is pretty good. It's why I was on the Titans in that game. It's why there was anguish, and it was why I like them on the money line, and it's why that money line early payout hit for those places that happen to pay out early money lines if you take a 17-point lead. And so I go, like, that's a pretty nice road performance by the Titans, right up to the point where Will Levis did a bunch of like dumb stuff. And so if I was afraid of the Jets defense, which I can't be based on that performance, or the Titans had some like go-to receiver that like absolutely was the key to their unlocking their offense, and oh man, he's got to deal with Sauce Gardner, who like predictably locked down Brandon Ayuk for much of that game, then I would be potentially worried. But like, I didn't like the offense for the Jets, and I didn't like the defense for the Jets. And I'm not asking the Titans to win this game, though I probably will be come Sunday. I just look at this going like, this line was 4.5, and it's down to 3.5, because I think the market respects more what the Titans did in that first game than they do what the Jets did in that game. And so for me, as long as this line's over 3, and honestly, even if it hits 3, it's Titans for me all day in this game. Like, I love the Titans. And again, just because things got super weird in that fourth quarter or towards the end of the third quarter there. And yes, the Will Levis thing is troubling, but like Aaron Rodgers wasn't any real better than Will Levis was necessarily. Obviously from a catastrophic play standpoint, he was, but I mean, this is a guy, I think the stat is 25 straight games without a 300-yard game for Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. Like, we talk about Deshaun Watson being washed, but like, as long as Raj is out there, it's more fun, but like, it's not necessarily some big advantage. I think they're getting average quarterback play. I think the offensive line was pretty bad. They didn't get anything from Breece Hall. They were pounding Breece Hall in that first half, and they just weren't able to get much movement going. They had some nice third down conversions, and they got a touchdown. Like, that's basically all that happened for the Jets offense. So, man, I love the Titans in this game, and I implore you to change your pick. There, I said it. Yeah,
I got a flag.
Oh,
I got a flag.
Is that different? Is that different than the card? What happened to the card?
No. The flag it's the same thing.
Same thing.
Okay.
It
just means we're changing the pick. The pick has been changed.
We didn't talk about this in the pre-meeting. I didn't know there was a flag.
No. Control room, control room coming with different props. And
stuff. They're the Will Levis of control rooms. They're wild.
Production team coming with props. Flag is thrown.
Okay.
That means the pick has been changed to the Tennessee Titans plus 3.5. And this is just a classic rules, right? Like in my mind, there's certain things you got to remind yourself. You get back into the season and it's like, hold on, home dogs at plus over a field goal. I mean, that's an easy one to convince me to switch. So we will do that here. The pick has been switched. The control room is doing work in terms of switching the pick on screen as well. Yeah. So credit to the control room for being on the ball here, switching things up. Tennessee Titans meet Aaron Rodgers. Interesting stuff. From Aaron Rodgers' current team to Aaron Rodgers' former team and the Green Bay Packers, who are at home hosting the Indianapolis Colts. And the Packers might be wishing they still had Aaron Rodgers to be their backup because Malik Willis, there might be a bunch of flags being thrown at Malik Willis because, he got in for one play and it did not go well. And I mean, it's kind of unfair because you come in at the end of the game to throw a Hail Mary, but it just looked so bad. Yeah. And he doesn't have the resume to show us much more beyond that.
And it's technically the easiest play to run, where it's like, just throw the ball really far. It's not,
like no one's expecting you to complete it.
Yeah, right? It's the easiest play.
Tough go for him. But yes, obviously no Jordan Love. He's out for a while as we saw him get injured, unfortunately, at the end of that game. Not before converting a nice parlay for me, though, on that last drive. He literally completed that last pass, which put him over whatever the marker was, I think 250 yards, and then got hurt the next play. And I was like, whoa, I'm gonna Homer Simpson out of week one and take that dub and move on. Yeah. But as we move on to this one, I need some help here because, Malik Willis, that's what they're going with here in week 2 for now. And they're 3-point dogs at home. Again, another spot where I'd love to take the home team here, but that would involve me having faith in Malik Willis. And I know that obviously they're going to change their game plan up and you're going to get a lot more run game, I'd assume, for sure. But is that enough against the Colts here who, I know that game was close.
Yeah.
I know the game was close for the Colts last week, but I don't know how impressed I was by Anthony Richardson. You know what I mean?
Right.
To be 3-point favorites against anyone. And I know Malik Willis qualifies as anyone, but talk to me about this game here because I'm on the Colts just because I feel like I know more there about that team as opposed to Malik Willis and what he has to offer.
Yeah, well, listen. This is an experiment, right? This is everybody's favorite game show that we run every after week 1, every week of the season, right? Like, what should the point spread be? Name that point spread, right? Because we have a starting quarterback injured, which just throws everything out of whack. Like, you could tell me anything with regards to the point spread, or at least you could tell me anything if we didn't have a system where we can rate teams and sort of evaluate what this point spread was. And as you say, like what it is and what it should be and all of that sort of stuff. So from a point spread perspective, I think in this experiment, if you will, the Colts are the control, right? This is a team that literally was -1.5 underdogs, or just say +1.5 underdogs last week. And then the line slowly drifted to 3. We talked about the idea, like the line has just drifted too far and you have to take the Colts. There isn't even really like an on-field handicap to it. It's just like the line is too far. There's no way we can get there based on how the market feels about both teams. And of course the game lands 2. And it's like, guess who's the genius, right? Like we are, right? Because it lands in that exact instance where it's like, if you had -1.5 with the Texans, you made a good bet and you're on the right side the whole way. But the gravitational pull of the NFL brought that game from a 9-point game down to a 2-point game, and Colts money got there. Point is like, if you're watching that game, like some of these other games, like, do you do anything with the Colts rating? No, because like the point spread literally went from one side of the result to the other side of the result, and you're not going to boost them up on that cover. You're not going to take them down because like they covered, and they were already rated as a below average team, around 46 out of 100. So like they're the stabilizer in this equation, right? And Green Bay, look ahead line for this game, Green Bay -4.5. Right. And like, I think that probably makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, right? Like it's not quite a touchdown against a semi-dangerous Colts team that has some things working for them, but it's not going to be 3 because Green Bay is discernibly better than the Colts. Then you take Jordan Love out of the equation and this thing goes all the way from 4.5 to 3 on the other side. And so I always go, how do we get there? Well, like we said, Colts number doesn't change. So this is a road favorite Colts team that is a below average team, right? Yeah. So think about it like this. What has to happen for the Packers rating for them to be home underdogs to a team that's a below average team? It has to plummet, right? Yeah. So let's talk about the range for the Packers. I think it's safe to say the range 50 to 70. Does that work for you on any given day with regards to like how, they might play? Yeah. Keeping it above average no matter what. At the high end, they're very good. They're competing with the Packers. They're a 70, maybe a high 60s team, that sort of thing. So, Shell, what do you think their rating is? It's always my favorite game. Ask Shell what he thinks the rating is after a starting quarterback gets hurt. What would you rate the Packers here with Malik Willis out of 100?
So the problem is I go way down. It's got to be like below 40, like, because the reality is too, I feel like there was so much to Jordan Love's abilities that made the Packers so good, right? Like it wasn't like he's just like he made plays, 100%. Right? Like that's how they were good. Him making explosive plays.
Mm-hmm.
So to replace him, if you're not getting those explosive plays, yeah, I don't know where that's coming from. So yeah, I go like 40, maybe like into the 38s, somewhere around there.
Okay. 27 is the answer for this point spread.
Okay.
Fair 27. Enough. Like that's like, and you know what a 27 looks like? It looks like the Carolina Panthers.
Ooh, okay.
Right? And that's after last week's debacle, not before last week's. That's not when we had hope for the Carolina Panthers. Like, spoiler alert, the Carolina Panthers rating this week is a 27. And so is the Packers, right? Think about it this way. If the Colts, a below average team, went to Carolina, what would the point spread be in that game, right? It'd be 3.5, something along those lines, right? Because look at the Chargers, who just beat, one pretty decently convincingly, I guess, against the Raiders. Spoiler alert, that line's only 6.5, right? And has moved up. And I think that's more to do with sort of the idea that the Panthers are maybe even worse than a 27. But my point is we'll get that's a massive, massive downgrade. And you go like, yeah, but Malik Willis, like, he's brutal. Like, how many passes he's going to complete? 9? And my argument to you would be like, oh, you mean like Anthony Richardson did last week, where he completed 9 passes, right? And so the point is like, yes, Anthony Richardson, is what, like, he could throw an incredible deep ball. Okay, probably should game plan for that. And not very accurate and can run. I mean, wouldn't that kind of be the scouting report for Malik Willis, like, prior to him getting drafted, or even B, today? Like, isn't that just kind of the thing, right? So if Malik Willis completes 9 passes, which, like, I realized he wasn't there all training camp, and that's the thing that's scary about this, because it is sort of like, we just kind of like signed him like a week and a half ago, and this is a failure on the Packers not to have a better backup quarterback setup, right? Like, you have to have at least a decent. There's a bunch of dudes floating around. They're not necessarily great, but they got to be better than Sean Clifford. They got to be better.
Take Tannehill right now, of course.
Then Malik, right. And honestly, if Tannehill came off the street right now, I mean, honestly, I think that the Packers +3 is a really good bet. To me, it's just a bet that kind of has to be made. And again, it's not something you're going to go to war with necessarily. But when we're talking about, can the Packers be better than a 27? Like, I think so, yeah. And by the way, I'm not convinced that the Colts are going to play to an above average level, because everything else about the Packers is still there, right? Like, that cadre of weapons that they have to throw to, if they can get a quarterback to throw it, a decent running game, and obviously a defense that, like, listen, the Eagles are tough, man. Like, don't get me wrong. The Eagles are tough, but a defense that I think is going to slowly improve throughout the season. So this is one where you just have to grin and bear it. A lot of people are going to just, like, come in on the Colts because they're going to trash Malik Willis. But, like, I don't think Malik Willis is good, but there also isn't, like, a sample size, the level of, like, some of these other quarterbacks that we absolutely know are terrible. Like, what if Malik Willis just runs a lot, right? Like, that's a lot more than, like, your Zach Wilsons of the world or your Ben DiNucci's of the world are all going to sort of do, right? So, yeah, it's a grin and bear it thing, man. And maybe it gets back to +3.5, because I know it touched some 3.5 there. And I think the market sort of realized, like, well, hang on a second. Like, the Colts, 3.5 on the road, like, you got to back it up.
Challenge flag is thrown here again, or maybe the decision flag. I'll come up with the name for the flag, one step at a time, right?
Yeah.
But the flag has been thrown again. The pick has been changed. Green Bay +3. And I mean, the one thing here, if you're Green Bay, you have a full week to, like, game plan. And it's not like your game plan is going to be, we're going to let Malik Willis sit back in the pocket and just, chuck it. Like, that's not going to be the game plan. So I got you. I'm with you.
Yep.
Okay. Feel a lot better here. What do you know? 2 underdog picks in a row. What's going on right now? Can we make it 3? We got the Pittsburgh Steelers in Denver taking on the Broncos. And, you know, the Steelers looked okay in week 1. Fields was okay, I guess, you know, like, okay. We'll stick with okay.
Yeah. Fields.
But really, Kirk Cousins went Kirk Cousins, right? That was kind of the deciding factor in that game. But hey, beyond that, Pittsburgh's defense balled out, which is what people, you know, love to see. I don't know, though, if I'm ready to take Pittsburgh as 3-point road favorites. And that's really what this comes down to. Can't do it, won't do it. Yeah, no, sir. So the Broncos, I thought, you know, a pretty solid performance from Bo Nix. And I think you'll see Sean Payton sort of, you know, let it ride a little more, you know, trust a little more, you know. And I like what I saw from the Broncos. I know it wasn't a great performance, you know, it wasn't like exceptional. But we'll take that. We'll take that. +3 at home. This is just another one of those, as we talk about, home dogs at a field goal or more against a team that, I mean, I'm not really afraid of Justin Fields, to be honest here. So, yeah, I'll take the Broncos +3.
Yeah, and it's like, it's Justin Fields or Russell Wilson coming back to Denver. And, like, you know, there's a lot of, like, quarterbacks coming back to old places that they played and, like, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a quarterback less likable in a locker room, you know, with a bunch of guys who, like, this isn't going to be like, oh, yeah, like, oh, I liked him. He was cool. Like, you know, we're chill. It's like, no, like, I want to kill Russell Wilson. Like, I want to get after this guy.
It was in Denver, right? Where, like, he had a birthday party. Sierra threw him a birthday party and only, like, half the team went. That was in Denver, or was that his last year's in Seattle?
You're the guy for that. I think Denver was high knees on the plane. Denver was high knees on the airplane, right? And, like,
someone in the comments will let us know.
That has to come out, like, somehow, right? Somebody on that plane didn't like the high knees. Let's put it that way. So again, my point is like, even if it's not Justin Fields, it's like just rabid dogs, like, trying to get after Russell Wilson.
I'm pretty sure I saw Tomlin already came out and said it's Justin Fields. Okay. Russ is hurt. Is hurt. He's out for sure.
And it's not the type of thing that's going to change the line necessarily. And listen, I'm not even positive I believe that Russell Wilson's actually hurt, but yada yada yada. Okay, so let's look at that Seattle-Denver game, right? That ends up as a push. Very weird first half where, like, safeties are happening at an alarming rate for Denver. I thought their defense held in there as long as they possibly could, but that was always going to be a really tough game for a rookie quarterback on the road, right? And so this idea that, like, oh, we need to evaluate Bo Nix based on that game and that game alone, and, like, is this going to work for Sean Payton? And all of a sudden it's like, kind of felt like a rough spot anyway. And by the way, like, they end up covering the closing number because I think that line got up to 6.5 by game time. Yeah. So it's not we lost by 20. The defense was terrible. Like, it's not even, you know, it's not a Washington Commanders situation. It was, like, he just couldn't really make a play to win a game. But he wasn't asked to win the game by the point spread. And he's not asked to win the game by the point spread here either, in the same way that the Steelers weren't asked to win the game last week. They were just asked to keep it close. As you mentioned, it just so happened that the Falcons and Kirk Cousins weren't necessarily ready, which they could and should have probably won that game and taken a lead and sort of made Justin Fields have to work for it. They just couldn't do it. I'll probably go to my grave betting on the Denver Broncos at home in their first game of the regular season. Like, I'm just going to do that for the rest of the time. I don't know what my record is. I think it's pretty good. Like, it's usually pretty decent, but it's the thin air concept, right? And so, like, they don't have any kind of advantage going to Seattle when it's going to be loud. You know, offensive communication is going to be a problem. They have a ton of advantage being in Denver. And listen, am I a little bit frightened of the Steelers defense? Yes, constantly, because TJ Watt is always a problem. But the Denver Broncos offensive line is pretty strong. And again, like, I think they can do more stuff than statue coming off of an Achilles injury Kirk Cousins can. I think they can do more stuff mobility-wise with Bo Nix in this game. And so I immediately grabbed +3 at even money, and it's starting to drift down where, like, now you have to pay some juice for it. So, like, get on Denver +3, as fast as you possibly can here, because I'm not sure that's necessarily going to be the number by the time kickoff gets around here, because I think the idea of Justin Fields on the road for a second straight week, like, I don't know, man. I don't like it, especially having to like cover an actual number in a game that I think is going to be pretty low scoring.
Yeah, for sure. Right there with you. Denver +3 is the pick there. We mentioned Denver last week playing Seattle. We'll move on to Seattle now traveling to New England, and Seattle is 3.5 favorites on the road. This is one where, again, I'm not on the home dog here because I'm trying not to overreact to what happened with New England last week. And this is a tough one here, right? It's a very tough one because normally, as much like I was talking about Vrabel before, this would be a classic Belichick at home, Belichick at home, home dog over a field goal, easy taking the Pats.
Sure.
Trying not to overreact to what we saw last week. And what we saw last week where they were able to run the ball. And that's really about it. Jacoby Brissett made a couple plays here and there, but enough. I guess he did enough for them to win.
Frustratingly just enough, right? Yeah.
But that was like, you're seeing Kraft and you're seeing the Gatorade shower. You're seeing Robert Kraft, giving the speech post game. That had kind of like, was that their Super Bowl type vibes here? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I get it. It's first win of the season. Not a lot of expectations, but it could be up for a letdown. And that's why I'm on the Seahawks. But the pause here, the reason for this podcast here is because should I just be following the rules of the home dog or no?
Well, listen, as much as we like to say, like, there are rules and like you need to, do this, do that, whatever, right? Like all of this stuff comes out in the wash to a degree of about 50% on either side, right? And you have to pick your spots here and there to either sort of quote unquote follow the alleged rules or not follow the alleged rules. Because like this could very easily be some game where like the Seahawks win by 30 points because because one, like, again, the infuriating part, and listen, week 1 in Survivor is the hardest week because again, you don't know who's going to show up and be ready to play week 1. And by the way, it's the NFL and the whole league is designed for parity, salary cap. Everybody's spending the same amount of money on players. And like the biggest point spread last week was what, 7.5? That's it. And the game was won by the underdog outright. Right. So like, it's the toughest week. The infuriating part of the loss is that it wasn't like, oh man, Patriots look pretty good. It was just like, this is the most lifeless game I've ever seen out of a decent, allegedly decent team. And like Jacoby Brissett is like slowly running out of bounds for first downs. And Ramondre Stevenson is just like pausing, and Bengals like linebackers and safeties are just like flying by him or like hitting his legs and having no effect whatsoever. And obviously drop passes, fumbles, on punts, and obviously the fumble at the 1 yard. And as bad as the Bengals were that entire game, if they just don't fumble on the 1 yard line, or Mike Gesicki actually catches the ball before he does his ridiculous gritty dance, then like we might be talking about a completely different scenario, and I might not be in anguish, and I might be even more mad at Will Levis because he would have been the only thing that went badly in week 1. All that is to say, it's not like we're sitting there going like, Patriots, they might have something here, guys. Like, it's like, I'd love to make that case for the home underdog and be like, oh, ton of value on the Patriots and yada, 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 right? It's like, I still think they're pretty bad, man. And it's like they're getting credit 34, to do our numbers thing, right? 34 out of 100. So it's like, listen, they're not getting like a ton of credit necessarily, but they're getting more credit than a 4.5 win team. We talked about why that was, because Brissett gives them a better chance of winning than Drake May necessarily would. But I think the Seattle Seahawks defense, the run defense particularly, is going to be so much better than what the Patriots saw against that effort by the Bengals. And so then what happens from a Patriots offense perspective? Not much, man. I don't think very much happens, right? And then it's just a matter of, can Seattle score more? And listen, the Patriots defense might be good again this year. And that's the sort of trepidatious part here, where it's like, okay, I don't want to go too nuts here with a road favorite, blah, 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 blah. But like, Seattle's got a ton of weapons. They can beat you with the run game. They can beat you through the pass, right? This isn't, Geno Smith is going to try the deep ball. Joe Burrow wasn't looking to do that. And so I just look at this and I go, there's a possibility that a team that we liked before the season started, and we still do, is getting or is only giving 3.5 points to what still might end up being a 2-15, 3-14 type of team. And we may end up kicking ourselves down the road that when we go like, oh, why don't we just take the Seahawks? It was only 3.5 points. Like, what's it going to take for the Seahawks to win this game? 20 points and cover this game? 2016? Like, and like, that seems like a really low number for a Seahawks team that, I think kind of got a lot of what they were, needed to get out of their system maybe in week 1. So yeah, like it's not it's weird that it's not comfortable because again, like we're going against what I still think is one of the worst teams in the league and why it was so frustrating. But I think Seattle is the play here. In New England, where I don't think New England is going to be some raucous environment because they think they have a team because of that win last week. I think even Patriots fans are like, yeah, like that was kind of crazy, but like the Bengals really stunk in that game, right? Like I don't think they were giving themselves credit for it.
Yeah, no, right there with you on the Seahawks there. The vibes might kind of be the same for what Vikings fans might be, finding a little familiarity with what you just described for Patriots fans where, okay, cool, we won, but it was against the Giants, Yeah. Anyways, the Vikings find themselves hosting the San Francisco 49ers as the Niners come in as 6-point road favorites here. I mean, listen, congrats to the Vikings. That's a dub, right? Vikings get the dub, but this is a step up in weight class. The Niners, listen, they did work. They did work, but there are a whole lot of more field goals than I would like to see from a Niners team. But in Shanahan, we trust. That was my lesson learned watching that game on Monday night. The run game, plug in whoever you want. CMC still not going to be there, but the run game, and then Brock Purdy's job is just, I don't want to oversimplify it, but he's throwing to like open spots and open receivers and open spaces. And as long as that happens, Niners should roll here. But I will say, if this was at 7.5, cool. I'd be riding with the Vikings, but under a touchdown, I'm comfortable with taking the San Francisco 49ers on the road. And yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay, I think we're gonna be head to head in this because I don't think I'm going to be able to talk you into the Vikings necessarily because of your affinity for the 49ers, and I don't think you're buying necessarily into the Sam Darnold resurgence. I am to a degree. Okay. I look at it going if Freaky Friday time machine type movie type situation. I don't know that Sam Darnold's that different from Kirk Cousins, right? Okay. Like if Sam Darnold gets drafted, like with RG3 in Washington and has like a couple of good games and then goes to Minnesota and we're all like, I don't really think this guy is any good, and prime time, he's bad, but like he still like shows enough flashes to keep his career. And then Kevin O'Connell comes in and now all of a sudden he's got an offensive mind to work with, and then Kirk Cousins is very good, or is it Sam Darnold that's very good now? Like it's all just kind of, mind meld together where like, I don't think we ever really said that Kirk Cousins was great. He was just better than Marcus Mariota going to the Falcons or Desmond Ridder in going to the Falcons. And that upgrade was very like Aaron Rodgers is healthy, so it's got to be good into the Jets. My point being that like I think this league is coordinator based, man. Offensive and defensive coordinator, play calling based, because there is so much talent out there. And watch college on any given Saturday, and you just go like, if any of these guys were just in the NFL, like I wouldn't be surprised, because physically they all just kind of look like they could at some point. And so my point is, if there's like tens of thousands of people who are capable of being Division I football players and, power conference football players and were stars on smaller conferences, then you weed those guys out and then those guys get to the NFL. Like being the 30th or 40th best quarterback in the league is still like really good. And if you have a coordinator who knows what he's doing, all you have to do is make the throws. And Sam Darnold can make the throws, and Kirk Cousins can make the throws. And I don't know how it's going to work for Kirk Cousins with a different offensive coordinator in Atlanta. But what I'm buying is Kevin O'Connell and just having a guy with an arm back there. right? And having a guy like Justin Jefferson. On the flip side with the Vikings, I'm also right there with Brian Flores. Might be a total asshat when it comes to being a head coach, but the 49ers had to deal with this dude last year. Now, there was some injury issues there. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey goes out in that game, and it looks, as of reports here, that it's unlikely that McCaffrey is going to be able to go next week. And it's like the Vikings are getting away with like no McCaffrey in back-to-back seasons. Like, what a great deal that is for them. But the point is Brock Purdy struggled in that game against Brian Flores and the Vikings. And again, the requirement isn't to win the game. The requirement is to stay in the game. And I look at that and I go, if McCaffrey's not in there, and for as much as Jordan Mason had a nice game, I don't know if you watched the Manning cast at all with Bill Belichick, but he was just talking about, and he's pointing out every carry for Jordan Mason, right side C gap, right side C gap, right side. He's like C gap, C gap, C gap, C gap. And it's because they're running away from the center of the Jets defense, which is Quinnen Williams, and then the middle linebackers, Quincy Williams, CJ Mosley, et cetera, right? And it's like, what if at some point the Jets had come up with something to stop an off-tackle run by Jordan Mason? It's like maybe the game would have gone a little bit better. But there's a possibility that Robert Saleh stinks, right? Maybe he's a bad coordinator.
Well, hold on. He was a good defensive coordinator with the Niners, no? Or maybe their defense was just that good?
or that was at the actual peak of the 49ers talent-wise, where like all of the guys that have been now dispersed throughout the NFL were on that team that year for Robert Saleh, right? And it's like, it's different now when you actually have to scheme something up. And it was frankly embarrassing that Jordan Mason is just going around the right side over and over and over again. And Bill Belichick's just sitting there going like, this is kind of brutal. Like, I get why they're doing it, but like, you got to make an adjustment. Like that type of attitude. I like to think Brian Flores is looking, going like, hey guys, we should probably stop the off-tackle run by the 49ers this week. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So it's like, again, and again, home to road. You talked about the concept going home to road and obviously the requirement here in needing to cover a big number. I just think Brian Flores can do enough defensively to create a couple of turnovers from Brock Purdy. We always talk about how those turnover-worthy plays, those turnover-worthy throws are at the coming at any given time here. I think the Christian McCaffrey thing shows up because if you're kicking field goals at the percentage that they were kicking field goals, I think that's going to be problematic. The Jets weren't able to turn Purdy over the way that I think the Vikings can. I think it's a really well-coached team on both sides. I understand why people don't like the talent, and I can understand why people are scarred by Sam Darnold. And you can maybe make the case the 49ers know Sam Darnold. He didn't play enough for the 49ers to know what Sam Darnold is up to. Honestly, Sam Darnold knows more about the 49ers than they do about him. So I think there's an advantageous element to that as well, if Sam Darnold's even paying attention. But if you don't like Sam Darnold because he was on the Jets and the Panthers, two of just the absolute disgraces when it comes to organizations and coaching situations and setups, like, I'm sorry. Like, honestly, I give credit to San Francisco for potentially bringing, having Sam Darnold get better professional help, so to speak. And that might end up backfiring this week when I think an underrated Vikings team that, by the way, didn't get any real market credit in their market rating. They are still being considered a 40 out of 100. Right? Despite a beatdown of the Giants. They're not getting any credit for that. And so I think there's some value here because I think they deserve more credit. I think they're about an average team, and an average team at +6 against this 49ers team without Christian McCaffrey, I think there's value to that.
I was actually going to say throughout that whole thing, what I thought you were going to say, and I was actually going to agree with you, is if you told me that Sam Darnold and Brock Purdy were the same, like, if you know what I mean, like, I would be like,
we talk about it every week. I just wanted to watch Sam Darnold in that offense last year for 3 games. That's all I wanted out of life. And we never really got it.
I feel bad for saying it because it sounds like I'm dissing Brock Purdy, and I'm not, but the Shanahan offense, as you just talked about, coordinators and what the ask is, make your reads, hit your spots. Cool. It's a tough one. And you almost had me here. I'll be honest. You almost had me here. But this is one that I'll be nervous about. I'll be nervously watching this game. I'll say that much for sure. Let's keep it going here. We move on to the Dallas Cowboys. Talking about big time favorites here. The Cowboys 6.5 point home favorites to the New Orleans Saints. I almost said Pelicans, not basketball season yet.
Amazing. Yeah.
Right. The Saints looked good last week. No, Saints rolling, Saints smashing.
Maybe.
Saints,
Yeah.
Fallen, dare I say. The Cowboys on the road, a solid performance for the Cowboys on the road in a tough spot in Cleveland. Not trying to overreact to the Saints though, because I'm still never going to really buy into Derek Carr, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But also trying to do the same with the Cowboys and not overreact here. But I do think the Cowboys offense might even be better at home because that's just typically what they do. Mm-hmm. And the Saints traditionally don't really travel well, right? Like traditionally, they don't really travel well. I'll lay the points here at 6.5. That's a lot. It is a lot. Mm-hmm. So this one I could be talked out of. I can't lie to you here.
Yeah, I grabbed like all the 7 I could handle when it was +7 earlier on in the week. You're not going to be shocked by this, Shell. The Cowboys got a really big bump in market rating after that win at Cleveland. I know, it's shocking. The market, people were interested in the Cowboys, or at least the anticipation of interest in the Cowboys, right? Because when odds makers come up with a line, right, they're changing the market rating, but they're doing so based on betting patterns, right? So if you go, wow, the Cowboys are really good this week, let's just bump them up a point or two in rating. They know that people are going to bet on the Cowboys. If you go, let's bump them up from like a 57 or a 58 to a 63. Well, now you're sort of talking about like, okay, well, you have to really want it to bet on the Cowboys. And that manifests itself in a 7-point spread. And so we're going to take some Saints money. We're going to drop this thing down to 6.5. And maybe some Cowboys money comes back and we sort of, have that fight all week long. So I'm already on the Saints +7. This isn't like, oh man, they look so good last week and anything like that. I don't know that was actually a real game. I don't know that we're taking anything from either side about that game, which we'll talk about when we get to the Carolina game finally.
Yeah.
It's really just, if we're going to watch that Browns team play the way that they did with the quarterback playing the way that he did, it's just one where I don't know that there's anything I can take away from that game with 2 injured, 2 tackles that were out, backup tackles for the Browns. It's like, yeah, Micah Parsons is going to cause a problem, especially if Deshaun Watson is mega shook. And the running game for the Browns, is considerably worse without Nick Chubb. Like, this might be a scenario where like running back really matters for a team. So, again, like I'm refusing to bump the Cowboys as high as the market has bumped them. They have bumped the Saints as well, but still as a below average team. And as much as the Saints are like really uninspiring and I don't want to bet them ever, it's less home and road for me. It's more favorite underdog for me. I don't want to bet on them as a favorite. I don't want to ask them to cover a number because Derek Carr had 59 yards on his like first long pass to Rashid Shaheed in that game and then had 141 the rest of the game, right? It wasn't like, oh, look at this offense, it's cooking with gas, right? Like they ran the ball well and obviously turned, Bryce Young over and got him off the field, constantly. Yeah, it's just we're just trying to stay inside of a number here, and I think like I'm just not there with the Cowboys just yet. I think the Saints defensive line can do some stuff with the Cowboys offensive line, and to me, like asking the Cowboys to win by, in my case, more than one score, because again I grabbed the +7. But even at 6.5, right? Like I have to kind of stick to my guns here and like the Saints here and think there's a possibility that they just win this game outright. And I'll refer back to speaking of Survivor, one of our worst memories, the Derek Carr led Las Vegas Raiders on a Thanksgiving, sashaying into Jerry World against a pretty good Cowboys team as touchdown underdogs and just walking away with an overtime victory in that game. So, maybe Derek Carr knows how to play the Cowboys defense. I don't know.
Why'd you have to remind me of that, man?
Because I'm just in a I'm in a spiral of death, of survivor death, a death
It was unnecessary
right now.
Totally unnecessary.
I know. I'm bringing everybody with me. If I'm going to be down here in the pit, everybody's coming with me in the pit. I don't care who has to be involved. I'm doing it.
I'm just going to move on, but it's not going to be to something positive because you're going to be talking about the Giants at the Commanders. And the Commanders are 1.5 favorites at home. The Giants do appear to be mega trash. That's all I really got on the Giants. I can't really add much more. Even their uniforms look trash last week as well.
Oh my God,
Washington at home. I thought Daniels looked okay. He had some moments.
Yep.
All right. I don't got much on this game, but I'll just say I'm on the Commanders at -1.5. Sure.
Yeah, and I bet it at 2.5 because I just did not want this to go to 3, even though from a market rating point spread perspective, the way these teams are rated and yada, 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 like they are rated pretty close to each other, right? I happen to think the Commanders are a little bit better than 36 out of 100, and I happen to think the Giants are worse than 35 out of 100. The Giants take
I'm with you.
Was a win last week, playing the Vikings, right? The easiest one I had. If I had just gone through life only betting that game, I'd be a lot happier. And then the Commanders' take was incorrect, right? And they weren't very good in that game. So using those numbers, the line comes out to -1.5. The market started at 2.5. There was some juice towards the favorite at 2.5. I thought, you know what? I better just get this 2.5 while I can, and thinking that it might go to 3 because how can you like the Giants? And then as these things sort of happen, and maybe it's a setup, because what I say by a setup is a lot of times people bet early on the week one way to try to get a better price on the other side. And so maybe this does end up getting to -3, and that's just, the setup. I don't know. My point is like, based on ratings, this line is fair. Based on ratings, I think the Commanders, even with that bad defense, I don't think Daniel Jones can take advantage of it. Like you said, Jaden Daniels obviously provides some danger with regards to his legs. He needs to learn how to slide. It's always a little bit scary when he's out there. And as much as we say, like, Buccaneers won that game convincingly, there was one play where Daniels gets loose. I believe it was Daniels, or maybe it was Brian Robinson. Gets loose down the sideline and gets inside the 10-yard line for a first down. And there was a sketchy suspect, maybe didn't even need to be flag thrown or didn't need to be done, block call that set the Commanders, instead of 1st and 10 inside the 10-yard line, to essentially, 3rd down, 4th down, field goal range or outskirts of field goal range, and then they missed the field goal. At that point, they were still in touch with the Buccaneers, right? And you never know. If they're still in touch, getting a touchdown there, who knows what happens the rest of the way. So whereas the Giants, come find me with the play that would have changed the course of the game for the Giants, right? Maybe they changed the course of the gameplay was them wearing those uniforms. Maybe if they don't wear those uniforms, things get a lot better. I think both these teams' defenses are pretty bad. You could make the case that the over is worth a look. Because I think both offenses can do, more than maybe they're giving credit for. But yeah, for me, this is Commanders, because I don't think these teams are equal, and -1.5 suggests that they are. And the Giants are coming from a home situation to the road, and the Commanders are obviously coming road to home. So this is an easy bet for me to make it 2.5, and even easier bet for me to make it -1.5.
Right there with you, my dude. Right there with you. As we move on to the Carolina Panthers hosting the Chargers. This game really sums up my feeling for the week in terms of what we were saying, teams that I like versus teams I don't like, and spreads that, seem like it's iffy for me to take the Chargers as 6.5 road favorites, right?
Yeah.
Like that's tough to do.
Yeah.
But then you watch the Panthers and you're like, yeah. And the reason, though, I'll give you why I am on this side in terms of taking the Chargers as road favorites here, big time road favorites, is because of what we talked about last week with Harbaugh and the infrastructure and what Harbaugh is going to do. We saw him do it with the Niners when he came in there. He's going to simplify the offense. We're going to run the ball, and, make things easier for their quarterback. And their quarterback's really good. So, if you do that, things might happen. And we're not talking about, a great team here. We're talking about the Carolina Panthers. So I will lay the 6.5 on the road with the Chargers here. Not really like it, but also not really watch a lot of this game either, if I'm being honest.
Right. Yeah, big time candidate for getting dropped from personal coverage, right? Internal house coverage.
Yeah.
I mean, you just kind of have to take the Panthers.
I know.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just I mean, what's my case, right? Well, okay, so my case is but like my case is, did the Panthers get downgraded after that atrocity in New Orleans last week? Yeah, big time, right? So they go from, what did we have here, 32 down to 26, maybe even lower than that, as we're sort of dipping, like you said, to 6.5. So yeah, let's go down to 25. And so people have to understand, like, 20 is like rock bottom in the NFL, right? And 80 is like max. And if ever we get to a point where a team is rated higher than an 80 or lower than a 20, you just automatically have to take the points with the team that's rated in the teens and lay or take the points with the underdog against the team that's being rated over 80. Because think about it, an 80 out of 100 is like a 14-3, 15-2 type team. And yes, those exist, but you don't expect a team to play at that rate every single week. And if they do, you tip your cap and you go, okay, you played like a 16-1 team this week. Kudos to you. So for the Panthers to not be a good bet here, with the acknowledgement, by the way, that the Chargers rating went up to an above average team to get to this point spread, right? So the Chargers are now a 52 out of 100. When before the season, before last week, they were below 50. And again, I don't know anything that happened in that Raiders game actually on the field would tell you, like, Chargers are a potential wild card. It's like, or they just kind of pulled away from the Raiders, who might be awful. So the point is like, for this to be a bad bet, the Panthers have to play worse than 25 out of 100. And you could say to me, they just did last week. And I would be like, yes, you're right. They did play worse than that. But again, road to home, right? And hopefully a better game script where if they don't give up a long touchdown or a touchdown on the first drive, maybe it doesn't get immediately hairy on the road for Bryce Young, because again, they are at home in this case against a defense that, again, I don't really think is going to be all that great this season for the Chargers. I think a grimy game. You talked about the running over and over again. Our guy J.K. Dobbins, like, keep it going, buddy. A run game doesn't really behoove a team of covering a big number. And so this number has gotten a little out of control. Part of that is, and listen, I acknowledge that this isn't helping my case for the Panthers. Derek Brown, their nose tackle, arguably their best player on defense, like, doesn't look like he's going to be playing in this game. And so run could work out nicely. But again, if run keeps low, the scoring down and the possessions down in this game, that helps the underdog, just so long as they're not giving up touchdowns on all of the sort of, 6, 7, or 8 possessions that the opponent is going to get. And that at home, maybe the offense looks a little bit better. Now, again, I've been soured on Carolina because Bryce Young is a guy who should be playing an absolute ton in the preseason, and they played him only a little bit in the preseason. And so, like, automatically I'm out on this Carolina franchise from a macro perspective. The trade is going to set them back for years. All of that stuff is true. But in this one scenario where the market has sold heavily on the Panthers, listen, I haven't bet it yet because I'll wait around and see if we get 7. Or like there's a cheap set, a minus 127 out there. But you just, this is the NFL, man. Like, this is the grotesque thing where it's like you just got to kind of take the big adjustment here off the Panthers and go plus 6.5.
No, I hear you. This is what I hate about this week. So many of these lines, like, I feel like this should be 7.5. And then I'm coming in being like, all right, 7.5 is just too high.
3.5 was the look-a-line, by the way. 3.5 was the look-ahead line. Just so you understand that there has been a significant adjustment. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying though? Like, I'm looking at these lines and I'm like, but
the line should be 13. Like, you know what I mean? Based off of Carolina last week, but like, they do get to start 0-0 in this game, right? Like, isn't a let's pick it up down 45-10. Like, here comes Jim Harbaugh handing it off to J.K. Dobbins, and Matt's not wearing pants, and
All right. I mean, I'm still on the Chargers here, but not liking it. When we regroup next week,
road faves, brother.
I know. When we regroup next week, we know where the mistakes will be made. But hey, listen. If anything, I'm an honest man here. I admit my flaws. I admit when I'm like, I'm not really liking this.
We had you flip 2 road favorites to the home dog, but 2 of them you stuck by. So we'll see.
Yeah, the Niners and the Chargers. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it. Anyways, let's keep it moving here to Sunday Night Football. We got the Chicago Bears heading to Houston. Houston as 7-point favorites. And I mean, I guess here's where I'm taking some points here. And Houston's favored by a touchdown. I'm on the Bears here +7. Caleb Williams, I mean, he did look super shaky. He did not look good last week at all. Maybe he settles down in week 2. I don't know. The Texans, they were doing all right. The Texans were doing all right. But at the end of the day, I do like the Bears defense. The Bears defense is something that we talked about before, where we thought that could be a group that might be okay this season. Okay, not great, but okay. 7 points just seems a little high, and seems a little high for me here, and that's really why I'm on the Bears.
So this is sort of pick your line and you're going to have to pay for it type of thing, because DraftKings right now it's 6.5 with the Texans juiced -115. I'm already in on the Texans here -6.5. I think the Texans going to blow out the Bears here. I don't think what we saw from Caleb, as much as I give credit.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yeah,
here?
sure.
How
absolutely.
is it possible that you're going to talk me into taking a big favorite when my whole goal here was to be talked into taking the big underdogs? What's going on?
You might be on the wrong underdogs.
I know.
I just look at, again, this way, right? Like, again, the gravitational pull from the Colts-Texans game brings that game from a 9-point game where really all the Colts could kind of muster offensively were big shots from the big arm of Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
The Bears couldn't muster anything at home. And as much as I give some credit to the Tennessee Titans for that, I now go Caleb Williams in a Sunday night loud Houston Dome environment. What is that going to look like offensively against a Texans defense that has a ton of dudes and can get to the quarterback? And Caleb Williams, like, he had running ability in college, but he had like college athlete competition running ability. Whereas Anthony Richardson has like next level, like track star, like size combo, like running ability, right? So I don't look at Caleb Williams and go like, well, they're going to be able to like get him loose against the Texans. Like, by the way, the Texans saw a guy who's better at that stuff. The Texans saw a team that is, better offensively. And so I just go, well, how many points are the Bears going to score in this game? And do I want to sit there on a Sunday night and watch CJ Stroud, as much as, again, we talk about how the Bears could be better on defense? CJ Stroud is not Will Levis, right? And it's just going to be CJ Stroud, just carve, short field, plenty of possessions, like all of that sort of stuff. And when you can get 6.5, which I think is the fair line, by the way, like I don't look at this going, oh man, like they didn't downgrade the Bears. Like they downgraded the Bears even in that win, which like that's the not crazy thing, but like the refreshing thing, if you will, that the market and odds makers look at that game and go like, Bears won, Bears covered, but like not only are we not upgrading them, we are downgrading them in this game. And the Texans got that small upgrade for winning the game on the road against the Colts. And so then this line calculates out to about -6.9, which is again right in between 6.5 and 7. Give me that 6.5 -115, because again, I think we're sitting there watching that going like, CJ Stroud's awesome. All of those weapons that they have, Tank Dell, obviously, Stephon Diggs with 2 touchdowns last week, maybe some Dalton Schultz in our lives. And Joe Mixon looked far more spry than I ever sort of thought possible. Maybe that's just early in the season stuff. Maybe that's a denigrade to the Bengals, which, like they could use more downgrading. I think this is that game that could be a decent sized blowout.
So the pick has been changed here, but the question I have here, you mentioned on one sports book it being at 6.5. I'm looking at ESPN bet. ESPN bet says Houston -6. What's going on here? What am I missing here?
Well, shop.
What am I making this? What am I making this line right here that I am taking the Houston Texans?
I see what you're saying.
What's the fair line here? Take him at 6.5.
I would say 6.5 is probably fair. That being, like, I'll put it this way, like, maybe it's 6 now and you can bet 6 now. By the time the listeners are listening to this, I don't know that 6 is going to be necessarily available. So I would say 6.5.
6.5. Yeah. The pick has been switched. The flag has been tossed. Another pick has been switched in a week where I wanted to have more underdogs. Somehow I ended up with, hey, yet another favorite.
There's still there's a couple that you can retroactively switch. I'm currently patting the seat next to me. Come on board.
I know. We got one more game here, and it's another big spread, and you probably won't be surprised at what I'm on here either. So you have the Atlanta Falcons in Philly taking on the Eagles. Eagles 6.5-point favorites, and guess what? My week continues, taking big spreads here with the Eagles at 6.5. Why can't this be 7? Right? Why can't it be 7? So then I can take the Falcons on a bounce back. Right. But here we are. I want to take the Falcons. I just can't do it, especially at it under a touchdown here. Jalen Hurts, as long as he doesn't do the Jalen Hurtsy stuff to like mess up what should be a prolific offense.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm good on the Eagles at 6.5. At 7.5, Kirk Cousins in prime time. We know we love to talk about that all the time. Does that transfer over to him in a different uniform? I don't know. Is that even really a thing? I don't know. Either way, Eagles, not in Brazil, back at home, laying 6.5 points.
No, and you wonder, like, does Brazilian travel, like, how many days does that sort of, like, equate to, like, it's not a short week, but it's like, man, that's kind of a rough situation. Okay. You're totally right about the Jalen Hurts thing. Like, God, some of the plays in that Brazil game were just driving me nuts. They get a small upgrade for winning that game and covering that game, right? So they go up like from 64 to 65, essentially, right? That sort of contending team level type stuff. Where the big adjustment is, and you're like, why can't this be 7? Because 7 would require an even bigger drop in the Falcons rating than they already got, which was pretty significant. Because remember, like, they closed that game basically 4 against the Steelers. Now, part of that might be some downgrading of the Steelers because Justin Fields was the quarterback. I don't know, whatever. People can sort of feel however they want to feel about that. But point is, the Falcons were up in like that 57 range, right? As a team that was like a -130 favorite to win the division. That's looking a lot dicier now that the Saints may be good. I don't know. But the point is now they're down to basically a 50 to get this line to where it is at 6.5. Now, the look-ahead line was 3.5. So again, if you don't believe me in the sort of rating context that we talk about, believe me in the difference of the point spread being from 3.5 to 6.5, right? And so you have to say to yourself, okay, well, obviously conceptual value is on the Falcons plus the 6.5, and why we're probably never going to see 7, as much as I'd love to see 7, as somebody who will be on the Falcons and is hoping to see 7 at some point. You go, all right, is the Falcons' loss last week, are things fixable there? And are they fixable against the Eagles? And so what I mean by that is, like, if you think Kirk Cousins was bad in that game, which would be a fair, I think, assessment, can you blame that on the guy playing NFL football for the first time since what was last, October, late October, early November, and maybe sort of not being like super confident with his feet underneath him? Get a game underneath you, get an extra day of rest, that sort of thing. Is Kirk Cousins going to be better against a different defense? That defense being the Eagles, who were letting some pretty wide open receivers against the Packers just scampering through the field like a Swiss boy through a meadow, right? Like right? And so it's like, yeah, we're hoping the Eagles tighten up the defense here, but it didn't look that way last week. And if you look back last year, I think it was week 2, maybe week 3, the Vikings and Kirk Cousins went to Philadelphia on Monday Night Football. And the first half of that game could not have gone worse for the Vikings. They looked god awful. Justin Jefferson's fumbling the ball in the 1-yard line. It was basically headed for blowout town. And then in the second half, they started to figure out what they needed to do. And so I think that experience from Cousins going up against the Eagles defense, again, different coordinator, obviously we've made all we need to know, we've talked about that, well enough before the season started. But again, if the Eagles had shown me better defensively in the first game, I would say that this is less likely to occur. But I think that Kirk Cousins, knowing that he has to get the ball to Drake London more, which is something that he said directly after the game, I think the Falcons are going to be able to move the ball against the Eagles. And so I don't want to lay big points against a team that I think can move the football. That is somewhat of a theme here with some of the underdogs that I've been on. And by the way, as we just talked about with Houston and Chicago, some of the favorites that I've been on, because I don't think the Bears can move the ball against the Texans defense. I think the Falcons can have that bounce back game. Does it necessarily mean they win the game in Philadelphia? No, not necessarily. And maybe it's a backdoor needs to be open, down 11, whatever type situation. But I think this is but I think this is a spot where the point spread is overinflated here. I honestly think it's probably going to close 6 instead of 7, but I'm willing to kind of risk that because I think this game could come down to a field goal, to be honest with you.
This is a tough one.
Come on, man.
Tough one.
Come on, the water's warm.
Here's a problem. Here's a problem. I don't want to just change this one just because of everything else that's gone on throughout the show.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? It'll make the bit better next week where I come back in and be like, you know what? That was a lot of favorites.
Am I crazy, or is that a lot of touchdown favorites in week 2 of the NFL? Literally the zig when everybody's zagging week of of the entire season.
And they put them all at just under a touchdown just to get suckers like me.
This is what I'm saying. And to not just give people 7 points, do you not understand the money that would come
7 points?
Of course, and that's the point. I would have already taken the 7 the way that I did with the Saints, the way that I did with the Bucs, right? All of these things. Where it's yes, of course I would take the 7, right?
Damn you, NFL. Damn you, NFL. But that's what makes this so fun, and wraps up another week 2 of the NFL season. And, we're looking forward to getting started on this week. But of course, before we get there, there'll be a lot more coming from you, Mr. Matt Russell. Where can the good people find you online with all your content, my friend?
Yeah, at mrussauthentic on Twitter. It's also the same on Substack.com, Substack app. You can type in the window, sports betting, or like I said, at mrussauthentic. You get all my content for free for this full season, not just football season, hockey season as well, March Madness, all of that good stuff. Everything's free this season. But yeah, follow on X/Twitter, and believe me, you will find your way to the Substack. It's been a really refreshing experience. Substack's an awesome place to be able to create all of this stuff and give out these bets. And you know what else has been really refreshing? Winning. Not that we didn't do that before, but you start a new project, a new experimental type thing, and you go oh God, what if we start 10-20 to start to see what a nightmare that would be. College football and the NFL has started really well. We are knocking on the wood, but it's been a really fun experience. And now that we're into the groove here where, the schedule every week makes sense. And before you know it, it's going to be week 18 in the playoffs.
I dabbled into a little college football last Saturday. Got to say, it was a lot of fun. Had some fun. I really did enjoy watching Dion and company get blown out. I mean, I was right there with you.
Incredibly fun. Buddy.
I enjoyed that. I even enjoyed that insane Iowa State game. That was just an insane game.
I know.
A lot going on in that game, which I don't even want to get you going there because I know there's a lot there. But my point is, go to Matt's Substack. Follow along for the college football stuff and, of course, the NFL stuff. And catch us Thursdays doing this pod, which you can get every single Thursday. Just make sure you follow along, subscribe wherever you get the podcast. That's how you support the movement that is the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and you can follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander and on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, following along, cheering on the winners and riding the waves of the losers. And I got to say, I'm very nervous heading into this week of NFL football, but that's what we do here. That's the fun of it. We'll be back to discuss that Of course, because as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast, as always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.